next presenter is going to be talking about a topic that I'm sure is close to the hearts of many designers, and that's authentication. How to do it well, how to do it securely, and how to do it to not interrupt your users and to still give them a seamless experience in your applications. So to that end, I would like to welcome to the stage now Tiffany Conroy. Tiffany, if you'd like to come up here. She's from SoundCloud, based out of Berlin. She's going to give us some of her experiences. How are you? You well today?
Yeah.
All right, good.
I am good.
Round of applause for Tiffany,
All
please.
Right. That's probably why the screen went dark. Okay. Let's see. So, power's good. There was some discussion. We have a very strong password policy at my office, and now I have to remember it under, pretty sure that I got that wrong. Let me start again. You made me forget where I was. I did it. Okay. Actually, to be clear, I'm not talking about password or sign-in security. I don't feel like I'm an expert enough to talk about that. I'm happy to talk about it casually, but I'm not an expert on security. I'm somewhere between novice and expert, but not an expert. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about making your authentication beautiful, not necessarily aesthetically, but from a user experience perspective, instead of having it covered in barbed wire. But first, who am I? My name is Tiffany, and I've worked at SoundCloud for 5 years, based in Berlin. My specialty for many years has been designing and building web-based tools, especially tools for operational staff. So at SoundCloud, for example, I built our user administration system, and it's used by our customer support and business development teams. And more recently, I've been the product manager for our sign-in and sign-up flows. I'm also a developer as well as a product manager. And the thing about internal tools and authentication, they have this thing in common, which is that they need to be efficient rather than, say, immersive or exploratory. So let me address something you may be thinking, which is, why should authentication even be something I'm thinking about? Isn't authentication a known problem with known solutions? So Facebook and Google do authentication quite differently from each other. Have you ever noticed this? And Facebook and Google are pretty mainstream in their approach. And if you look at Slack and Medium, for example, they're doing something completely new and also still different from each other. So why do you think that is? We can't know for sure what their reasons are, but I know the reasons that we at SoundCloud decided to change our sign-in flow, which is still a work in progress. So first now, let's think about your product. Your product is a beautiful garden of valuable experiences. For many reasons, your product might only function when you know exactly who is inside. So you put a wall around the garden, so you only let in people who sign in or create an account. Now, people don't specifically want to sign in or create an account, they just want in the garden. They want the features that being signed in gives them access to. But they have to get around this wall. But how easily can people get inside your wall? Is your gate covered in barbed wire? So what exactly is this barbed wire, and what exactly can we do to tear it down? The barbed wire are all of the various things in your process that people don't want to do, and they already don't want to sign in, and you're making it painful. So there's one way to fix sign-in, right? Let's make it more fun, yeah? For lots of products, designers and product managers are focused on making products as engaging and as fun as possible. They measure their success by increased volume of interaction, and at SoundCloud, we aim to make more people listen to more music for longer, more frequently. People enjoy music, they want to listen to music, and we want to give them music to listen to. This is what we call user value. So let's apply this logic to sign-in. Let's make sign-in really fun. So people just want to sign out and sign back in all the time. Yeah, that's nonsense. No one would do that because the act of signing in has no inherent value. It exists only out of necessity. Some user experiences are best when they are never experienced, and clearly signing in is one of these. Authenticated experiences have high value. They're personalized, they're customized, they give you exclusive access to something valuable, right? Netflix is this. It gives you exclusive access to content, and they give you a personal experience. So signing in is a pain, and your product on the other side is the prize. And the aim is for making the pain of creating or signing in be compensated by the prize on the other side. And to make this true for as many people as possible, you want to make signing in as painless as possible. When there's a high potential for this barrier to inflict pain, that's what I've been calling the barbed wire. And at SoundCloud, for too long, the authentication flow was covered in barbed wire. So our case study is SoundCloud's old authentication flow. Small disclaimer, it's still our authentication flow on some of our products. So our sign-in flow had been designed really early on in the history of SoundCloud, and at that time it used very standard user interactions for authentication that everyone used and everyone expected, and these have become very dated, and several years have passed. And I'm not going to go into detail exactly what the flow is, but you can imagine that it's a very typical sign-in flow, and let's instead focus on the pain that it inflicted on users. So how do we know our authentication flow is painful? First of all, we analyzed support tickets. My colleague Maytal, she was working in customer support, and she noticed that there were many users writing in who were having trouble signing in or accessing their account or creating an account. And she wanted to dig deeper, so she looked into the details of the individual support tickets to identify patterns. And each one of those patterns was something painful that we could fix. Another thing we did is we set up detailed monitoring of our authentication endpoints and all the errors that we were seeing in our code. We investigated the source of these errors in detail, looking for either a code-related bug or a UX-related bug. I will detail some of these painful things also. We saw again and again in usability tests that people were getting tripped up just by signing in, and that's not even what we were testing. We set up a conversion funnel. So a conversion funnel is a known concept where you track in a process where the user gives up or fails. And depending on where that happens, it tells you what part of the process needs improvement. And for technical reasons involving legacy systems, we were not actually able to set up a detailed conversion flow through each of these steps, which was one of our motivations for rebuilding the flow. But what we knew for sure was there were many people starting the process and not finishing. So what was the nature of this pain that we found? I'll walk you some of the categories of pain we found with some really specific examples. First category is a trap, which is a punishment for entering an unexpected situation that is not ideal. There are several paths through an authentication flow which are not ideal, but which are very common. The traditional way to deal with these is to show the user an error. For example, forgetting your password. When your password is entered incorrectly, many user interfaces consider this an error. In some cases, such as our old mobile flow, the person is forced to start the process again from the beginning, and they have to re-enter their email address. I'm sure we have all experienced a platform that does this. SoundCloud does this. Forgetting your password is totally normal. When my colleague Duana and I looked at our metrics for signing in with a password, we found that more than 50% of all attempts to sign in with a password failed because the password was wrong. And that includes excluding spam, like spammy attempts. A password can be incorrect because it was typed improperly, which is really hard to tell because you can't actually see what the characters are. We've seen an improvement where people are shown their password. But if you have a significantly secure password, you're not going to notice a typo anyway. Fact is, people forget their password all the time. People mistype their password all the time. So why do we treat this as an error instead of a normal state of being? So avoid traps. Expect common, although non-ideal, situations. Because treating a common situation like an error is barbed wire. So another type was a double-edged sword. This is a feature that's meant to protect you, but it can hinder you. My favorite example is the confirmation modal. Everyone has seen the "Are you sure" modal. It's meant to protect you from making mistakes, but it's also really annoying and patronizing. As an alternative, an undo feature would protect you, but not hinder you. Another example of a double-edged sword? Passwords themselves. We have seen that passwords can hinder you, even though we know they protect you. So you may have seen the passwordless approach that Slack uses, and they call it the magic link. The idea here is that Slack completely downplays entering a password. You can see at the bottom it says type password, and it's not the call to action. You're never asked to remember your password, and you're never forced to admit that you forgot it. Instead, you click on this send magic link, and you're sent an email, and you're given a short-lived link sent to the email address associated with your account. You click it, it immediately signs you in. So this approach makes sense because people don't care what their password is. They don't want to set a new password, they just want to be signed in. Medium goes even further. You never set a password. When you're using email, they also have Twitter sign-in. When you sign in with email, you provide your email address, you go to the next step, and you're sent a link. It's the same concept as with Slack. You're sent a link, you follow that link, and you end up signed in. You never even have the option to set a password because you're going to forget it or lose it anyway. So for those of you who are feeling like this is a little bit uneasy and unusual, I would like to point out that passwordless sign-in is exactly as secure as standard password reset. How does password reset work? When you request your password to be reset, you're sent a short-lived link to your email address associated with your account. You click the link, you set a new password, and you're often signed in immediately. If your email account is compromised, then you are at the risk of account takeover. The point here is that password sign-in is exactly the same security level as password reset, but with the barbed wire removed. So at SoundCloud, we really like this idea of passwordless sign-in, but we have not yet implemented it. Passwordless sign-in like this type also has the issue of if people lose access to their email account, then they've also lost access to the SoundCloud account. And so you have to think of a secondary strategy for signing in, perhaps ask for a second email to be on the account so they can recover it that way. In any case, to avoid double-edged swords, keep the protection and remove the hindrance. Okay, so Russian roulette. Forcing someone to make a choice that might be wrong or not. So an example is making people choose whether they want to sign in or create an account. With so many products and services on the web, people can and do forget whether they even have an account with you. When you become as large as SoundCloud and you have as many users as SoundCloud and you've been around for as long as SoundCloud, some people return to the platform perhaps months or years later. So all they really want is to the other side, and now they have to choose. Okay, do I try and sign in and then be told that account doesn't exist, that address doesn't exist, and then I have to start again creating an account? Or do I start creating an account and then it says it's taken, so then I have to go back and try and sign in? Like, for these returning users, forcing them to even make this decision is yet another hurdle. And if they think they did have an account and don't, they're confused. And if they think they don't have an account and they did, they're confused. So instead, we prompt the users to identify themselves first. So they choose either Facebook, Google, email, or username. And then from that, we know if they have an account. We know if they have an account, and we tell them. And we give the next step depending on whether or not they have an account already. So on our new flow, you can see at the bottom, we don't prompt for password, we just prompt for email address. And then the next step, either you are prompted for your password or you're prompted to create your account. Something we do also need, which we haven't added in this screenshot, is like, hey, why am I seeing this? Oh, maybe you typed your address wrong. But in any case, you're prompted to create an account. And the person doesn't have to choose because we know. So another example of Russian roulette is making people pick a unique display name during account creation. So short story time. At SoundCloud, we used to require that all display names used to be unique. And this was an historical accident where we equated at some time usernames and display names. What's the difference between a username and a display name? On Twitter, your username has to be unique. GitHub is the same. But your display name can be anything you want. You can change it all the time. So on SoundCloud, it used to be that your display name also had to be unique, even though it was basically meaningless for it to be unique. It held no value. So if your name is Tiffany Conroy and you want your display name to be Tiffany Conroy, you couldn't be that if somebody else had it. And we kept this requirement for a really long time. And we didn't auto-generate something for newcomers that they could just say was fine, like the way Tumblr does it. We didn't give a suggestion the way Twitter does it. We just made them like keep trying. This made it really hard for people to get past the stage of creating an account. So to avoid Russian roulette, just remove these risky decisions. We remove the requirement that a username, that a display name be unique, so people can just move past that really easily. So another example is friendly fire. For those who don't know this term, friendly fire is when a military force attacks a non-enemy because they made a mistake. So this is about software bugs. An example of friendly fire, making wrong assumptions about names. If you've seen blog posts, it's very easy to make wrong assumptions about names. And in our case, our original rules of display names were that they had to have only alphanumeric characters with only Latin letters plus some accents. They had to start with a letter, and they had to be at least 3 characters long. Now, clearly, these rules are Latin alphabet-centric, and we as a company needed to outgrow this assumption. But it was worse than that, because when we looked at our error logs, we saw that there were Facebook signups that were failing because of the display name. And what we realized is that when someone signed in with Facebook, we would take their name on Facebook and set it to be their display name on SoundCloud. But the rules we had did not work for people with non-Latin names. They did not work for people with only 1 or 2 characters, such as Chinese names. And we were telling the person there was something wrong with Facebook, and the real problem was that we didn't accept the name that we had assigned to them. And by looking at these errors, we realized that we had made a wrong assumption about display names, and we were creating inescapable errors for these users. We also made wrong assumptions about email addresses. So our user model required that a user account have an email address, even though the user might just listen to some tracks or create a playlist. And we only legally needed an email address if the person was going to upload content. So we had assumed that all Facebook users always have an email address, because when we did the original integration, that was true. Facebook required you had an email address. And Facebook required that you share your email address with us. And over time, this changed. Not all Facebook users have an email address. They don't have to share it with you. And so by looking in the errors, we found that many of our Facebook users didn't have an email address, and we were not letting them sign up. Now, we had a few choices. We could have either prompted for an email address or not required one. So it is possible now on SoundCloud to sign up with Facebook and not have an email address. And this is what we did to fix it. So to avoid friendly fire, look at your error logs and fix your bugs. Seems straightforward, but some of the reasons why you're having conversion problems might be your fault. So don't make your users suffer for things that are not their fault. So crossed wires, when users misunderstand what they're doing. So we saw that people were starting to create an account, but they ended up signing in, and the reverse. So when we looked at our successful sign-in and create account conversion rates, we saw that we had some people who were crossing over during the flow. As I said before, we didn't have detailed in between, but we only knew they were crossing over. This was especially worrying because we were worried people wouldn't notice till very late in the process, and you can imagine that that's really frustrating because you have to start again from the beginning. So we knew that this was happening because people could forget if they had an account. They could forget if they wanted to sign in or sign up. However, we were able to confirm there was another reason that this was occurring. We were using the terms sign in and sign up because as a pair, it seems very elegant, right? Sign in, sign up, pick one. Now, all of you understand English, and yet I am sure some of you also find this confusing. This combination turns out to be confusing for people who are not native English speakers. One of our analysts, Darius, suspected that this might be the case, and he uncovered the evidence to prove this theory. He checked the crossover rates in countries with low English competency levels against English-speaking countries. And indeed, there was a difference, a noticeable difference. The problem, of course, is that these prepositions in and up are meaningless to non-native speakers, and at best, they're confusing. People have been trained for years that sign is associated with sign up, and they were looking for the word login. And we didn't want to, so we knew we had a problem, we needed to change it, but we didn't want to change sign in to login because we thought it was too geeky, and Google was also using the word sign in at this time, just generically. So we tried using the terms sign in and create account because they're very different from each other. And we saw this crossover effect in non-English speaking countries go away. So by looking at the different conversion funnels in the different demographics, we were able to see a UX problem that didn't exist for everyone. It only existed for some populations. So one way you can avoid crossing wires in general, though, is to make these choices more distinct. So what do you measure to see if you reduce the pain? And find out whether or not we can validate the solutions that we came up with to address the pain. So there's an obvious answer, right? You look at exactly the same measurements that you used to find the pain in the first place. And so that also means really the following, which is how do you measure to see the pain at all? In general, continuously, and ongoing. Because what you measure to start making the improvements is the same thing that you measure to validate them. And because this aspect is so essential, let's just quickly review the pain indicators you probably want to monitor. Task completion rate. So of the people who started the process, what % finished? This is also called the conversion rate. The drop-off points. Do people stop right after seeing the first step? Or maybe they don't know what the value on the other side is, or maybe they stop somewhere in between, and there might be UX issues. Time to complete. Among those that did complete, how long did it take to go from start to finish? Aim for shortening this time. Usability tests. Look for signs of confusion in usability tests. This is a huge topic, but if you haven't been doing this and you want to get started, there are some great web-based accessibility, web-based usability testing services that allow you to set up self-administered tests. And you want to see a reduction in support tickets or visits to your help documentation. So I hope that you have a few tools that you can use to remove the barbed wire from your authentication experience, and thank you.
All right, thank you, Tiffany. Very interesting. I was thinking about your with your authentication and the pain points you were talking about here at the end, how you were able to track that. Mm-hmm. What about users with multiple accounts? Mm-hmm.
What about them?
Well, I mean, I for yourself, I have multiple SoundCloud accounts. I have to manage multiple things. How is that being taken into consideration in the flow? Because most of the time it's like, oh, I got to put a different email again. Yeah, I can use a derivation on my Gmail email, put another one, another password.
Yep. So something we've been talking about, and I can't say that this is happening immediately, but something that we've talked about a lot is the distinction between, and we're trying to come up with a terminology for ourselves, is an account versus a profile. So on SoundCloud, you have like a display name, and it's your artist profile. Maybe you have a side project. Maybe you also are participating in a band, and maybe your band all want access to the same account.
Okay, yeah.
And so we've been thinking about the distinction between you authenticate yourself, you give your identity, and then you pick which profile. Does anyone use this on YouTube? Has the same thing? Like, I sign into YouTube with my email address, and it asks me if I want to be this profile or that. Like, I have like 3 different profiles.
Right, that's what I've got going on YouTube myself now.
And so we'd like to do something like that on SoundCloud, because obviously for creators specifically, I think for people who are just listening, it's not as important. Although maybe you're like Netflix and you want to have like this taste profile and that taste profile, and my daytime persona is, I don't want you recommending techno in the morning. I don't know why you would do that, but the point is that this is absolutely something we've been thinking about. We're in discussions of how to untangle these things, which I'm calling account and profile, because I think that we definitely would like to move that way.
Because it sounds from what you're talking about, it's very data-driven at SoundCloud. Like you were talking about the instance where with the sign-in, create account thing, and you want to show data and prove that.
And it's absolutely true that we know that there are many people with multiple profiles. And I'm trying to remember how we measured that. I think we measured... We have some
sort of IP login
yeah,
identification thing.
I'm trying to remember exactly how we figured it out. Like maybe it's like number of profiles per device ID or something. I'm not sure.
Okay, you could work it out that way. Okay.
It's definitely the case though.
Okay, any questions? Raise your hand. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Do you think it is possible to lose the email password authentication completely and use only third-party authentication providers like Google, Facebook, Twitter?
Absolutely.
Yandex?
You could just choose to use these identity services, and the only risk you have then is which one do you pick, which ones do you pick. We have Facebook and Google. Why don't we use Twitter? If we move into another market, which other one do we pick? So the question then becomes, how many of these services do you provide? But absolutely, it is totally reasonable to only use that as a method. That also means that you don't have to worry about protecting their passwords, those people's passwords. You only have to worry about protecting the tokens that are issued to you to access their Facebook accounts. I did actually have a section which was like, if you can avoid this by having some sign-in flow like Facebook. The great thing about Facebook is, as an example, and you get the same thing with some other accounts, where there's like a photo and a name and other information that you might want to create an account out of, is that the person doesn't have to enter it, and they really don't have to care whether they're signing in or signing up. You can make it entirely seamless.
Do you create a situation then, though, because I'm looking at that, now when I go to log in somewhere, I'm like, oh,
Which
did I log in with Facebook or did I log in with Google? I forget.
It's a little bit Russian roulette again, right?
Yeah.
So the way that we get around that at SoundCloud is we try and connect the Facebook email address with the user's email address on their profile. If the email address on the profile has been confirmed, and the Facebook always doesn't allow login unless it's confirmed, and so you can basically use email address as the secure thing in common.
Okay.
So we try and connect them. So if you have an account, then we try and do it for you behind the scenes.
Sure. Anyone else before we finish off the session? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Am I correct that there is no sign-in possibility at all on your mobile site? And if I'm correct, why did you end up in that decision?
Sure. That's not a sign-in question, but I can address it. The main thing is that, so what he's talking about is that our desktop application, you can sign into it, and our mobile application, you can't sign into it. It's an anonymous experience only. And what we found was that we were too much dividing ourselves between, So how much of a personalized experience do you put on mobile? Do you put everything on mobile? And what we found just is like, we're actually a pretty small company. People hear how big we are and they think that sounds really big. Like we're 250 people, which sounds like a lot of people, but I don't know how big, like Spotify is huge. Like by comparison, we're not that many people. And we just felt like we couldn't give like a really comprehensive signed-in experience, because at some point we did have that. I don't know how long you've used SoundCloud, but at some point you could sign in, and then it's like, okay, do they really want their playlist there? Basically, we had to make a choice of like focusing ourselves, and what we found instead is people can install our iOS app and our Android app for a personalized experience, and that the mobile app should be there in case someone sends you a link, you can listen to it, and then to really engage with it, you need to go into the mobile app. Again, not actually a sign-in question, but I mean, it's a not sign-in question.
All good. All right, we're going to have to leave it there, I think. Well, please have a round of applause for Tiffany. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fascinating presentation.